Ratios. I want you to write ratios on the top of your paper. I can identify and use ratios to compare quantities. I can apply the relationship between ratios and equivalent fractions to solve various problems. I want you to draw a line down your paper. I want you to write the word ratio. And as you're watching a short video today, I want you to get a definition. Skip about 3 lines, and I want you to write ratio versus fractions. So as you're watching this video, try to find out all of the way ratios and fractions are the same and how they're different. Skip about 6 lines and watch how shown, or write how shown. Then while you watch 3 ways ratios are shown.
Hi, welcome to Math Antics. In this lesson, we're going to learn about ratios. Well, what in the world's a ratio? Well, let's look it up in a math book to find out. It says here that a ratio is a comparison of 2 numbers by division. Well, that's true, but it's also a little confusing. And it's confusing because most of us think of comparing numbers as trying to decide if a number is greater than, less than, or equal to another number. But with ratios, we're not trying to compare numbers like that. Instead, we're really trying to see how 2 numbers relate to each other. So at Math Antics, we like to think of ratios as a relationship between 2 numbers by division. Okay, but how do you compare or show how 2 numbers are related by division? Well, to see what the by division part really means, let's look at an example of a ratio. Excuse me, that's not a ratio, that's a fraction. Oh, it's a ratio all right. Mathematically, ratios and fractions are basically the same thing. It's just that when we use a fraction in a particular way, we call it a ratio. Well, sure, everybody knows that. Well, like I was saying, ratios are basically just like fractions. The difference is how we use them to describe things in the real world. To see what I mean, let's look at examples of how we could use the fraction 1 over 2 and the ratio 1 over 2. Mathematically, these are both the same thing. They're just the division problem, 1 divided by 2. But in the case of the fraction, we usually treat it as if it's just a single number. For example, at lunchtime, you might eat 1 sandwich, or if you're really hungry, you might eat 2 sandwiches. But if you're not very hungry, you might just have half a sandwich. We can use the fraction 1/2, just like we use 1 or 2 to show how many sandwiches you eat. It's just that in the case of 1/2, we know that it's only part of a sandwich, just a fraction of one. Now let's see how we can use the ratio 1 over 2. With the ratio, we don't treat it as if it's just a single number. Instead, we pay close attention to the top and bottom numbers because we use them to refer to different things. For example, let's say we're planning to go on a picnic, and for every 2 people that are going on the picnic, we're only bringing 1 sandwich. In that case, we'd say that the ratio of sandwiches to people is 1 to 2, or 1 sandwich per 2 people. Do you see the difference between our fraction and our ratio? The math part of each of them is the same. But with the fraction, both the top and bottom numbers are referring to the same thing, the sandwich. However, with the ratio, the top and bottom numbers are referring to different things, sandwiches and people. The fraction shows a part of something, but the ratio shows a relationship or a comparison between 2 different things. And you can see that they're the same thing mathematically, because if you did have the ratio of 1 sandwich per every 2 people on a picnic, guess how much of a sandwich each person would get? Yep, half a sandwich. Alright, so now you know that fractions and ratios are basically the same thing. But since they're used differently in math, sometimes they're also shown differently. Once in a while, instead of seeing the standard division form, a ratio might be represented with this symbol. When you see a ratio written this way, it just means 1 to 2 or 1 per 2. For example, in this picture, you could say that the ratio of dogs to cats is 3 to 2. 3 dogs to 2 cats. And you could also write it in the standard division form, 3 dogs over 2 cats. They're just different ways to write the same ratio. Ratios are used all the time to represent all sorts of things in real-world situations. So let's see a few more examples to help you really understand what ratios are. Have you ever wanted to compare apples to oranges, but someone told you you couldn't? Well, you can with a ratio. Now let's say a fruit stand sells 5 apples for every 3 oranges they sell. The ratio of apples to oranges would be 5 to 3. Or, have you ever helped someone bake cookies? The recipe might tell you that for every 2 cups of flour, you need 1 cup of sugar. That means that the ratio of flour to sugar is 2 to 1. Or, what about your TV screen or your computer monitor? Have you ever heard someone say that the size or aspect ratio is 16 to 9? 16 to 9 is the ratio of the screen's width to its height. So if the screen is 16 inches wide, then its height would be 9 inches tall.
All right, so let's look at this. Let's get our notes back out. A ratio, let's write, is a relationship of 2 numbers by division. A ratio and a fraction are basically the same thing. The difference is how we use them. So you really only need to write what's in the blue. They're basically the same thing. A fraction is a single number or its part, where a ratio would have 2 different things. So a fraction is 1, a ratio is 2, showing that relationship. So it's shown 3 ways: with a fraction bar, like 3 over 2, with the word 2, 3 to 2, or a colon, 3 to 2. So let's get this. You need to understand a ratio has a couple of different parts. One kind is a part-to-part. That would be like in our classroom if I said we're going to find out a ratio of boys to girls. Well, if we counted them up, we could say we have 13 boys to 15 girls. Part to part. Part to whole would then be, for instance, like girls to the class. So you could say, well, we have 15 girls to 28. That's to our total class. Rates I want you to write right now, but it's something we're going to look at later. So for instance, you poll 8 people as they get off a roller coaster. 3 people did not like it. 5 people did like it. So what are we talking about? We're talking about the people who didn't like it, did not, and the people who did like it. So there's 3 that did not and 5 that did. So what we're asking here is the ratio of the did not likes to the likes. So order matters. There's 3 people that did not like it and 5 people who did. So we have a ratio of 3 to 5. You could write it 3 over 5 or 3 colon 5. In this one, it's a ratio of likes. So we got to go find there are 5 people who liked it to the total, which now we would add those 2, which gives me 8. So my ratio is a 5 to 8. All right, so let's look at this one. In a classroom, 13 of the students were girls and 7 were boys. What's the ratio of boys to girls? So if I look up here, you have to go back into your information and they may not be in the same order. So this is 13 of them are girls. So I'm going to put a 13 here. And 7 are boys. Now I have the correct order. The ratio of girls is 13 to the total students, which would then be adding them together, which would be 20. All right, so find the value to make your ratios equivalent. Basically, a ratio can be written as a fraction. So if that's the case, this is 6 is to 9 as, or equal to, something, because we don't know what that is to 3. So this is exactly what we were doing with equivalent fractions. How did I go from 9 to 3? I divided by 3. Whatever I do the top, I do the bottom, which would give me 2. 6 is to 9 as 2 is to 3. So rewrite this as a fraction. Remember, these 2 dots just mean a fraction bar. 32 to 9 is the same as 16 to something. So how did I go from 32 to 16? I divided by 2. Or you could say you times by 2 if you're going that way. And now I need to divide this by 2, which would give me 45. You go ahead and try the last one. All right, from 24 to 6, I divided by 4. So I got to divide the top by 4. If you don't know, you're going to have to go over here. 4 goes into 7 once, would give me 32. 4 goes in there 18 times. So 72 is to 24 as 18 is to 6. You can go ahead and get started on your worksheet.